to people in Georgia about the changes to the state's voting laws, and we are here to discuss why it is so critical for Congress to enact basic federal standards to ensure that all Americans can cast their ballots. I would like to thank my colleagues who are in attendance. Of course, Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock. I got the privilege to attend Ebenezer with him yesterday. And also Senator Ossoff, who of course was also recently elected as a leader on this committee. And of course, okay, all right. We'll cheer for both Georgia senators right now. Okay, here we are. Thank you. And also with us today is Senator Merkley from the state of Oregon, who is the lead author of the For the People Act. And last but not least, Senator Padilla, who many of you know was the Secretary of State of California, incredibly knowledgeable on the area of voting rights, and took a red eye to get here today. So that is a long way from California. I'd also like to welcome the following leaders from the state of Georgia who are here with us today. Georgia Rep. Billy Mitchell, who will also give a statement, who is the chair of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus and the president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. Chair of the Georgia Black Caucus of State Legislators, Senator Tanya Anderson, who I had the privilege to talk to yesterday. Representative Deborah Bazemore, who's with us as well, Representative Rhonda Burno, Representative Sandra Scott, and former Representative Cleo Washington. In addition, I want to welcome our witnesses, Senator Sally Harrell, right here, she wore the right color, matching with me, Ms. Helen Butler, well known to the community, and Mr. Jose Segarra, who I will introduce shortly. I want to thank Senator Blunt's staff who are here with us as well. The location of today's hearing, the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, is a powerful reminder of how our country has long fought against the forces of injustice, and that it has only been through the power of citizens standing up to the forces of oppression through speaking truth to power that change has occurred. This morning, we had the opportunity to tour the exhibits, and anyone watching today, I really urge you to come to this museum in Atlanta and tour this museum. You literally can sit at the lunch counter where the freedom fighters sat and have headphones on and picture yourself in that position, and how long can you sit there? How long can you tolerate it? There's another exhibit honoring Georgia's own hero, Representative John Lewis, who passed away just over 1 year ago, who never gave up on justice, never stopped marching toward freedom. I have always been in awe of Congressman John Lewis, of his persistence, his resilience, his faith that the country could be better if only we put in the work. His faith in our country led him to coordinate efforts for the Mississippi Freedom Summer, recruiting college students from around the country to join the movement to register Black voters in the South. And it took him to Selma, where he helped lead 600 marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on that dark day that became known as Bloody Sunday. The horrific events of that day shocked the nation, with marchers attacked with billy clubs and tear gas. Congressman Lewis's skull was fractured. He bore the scars until the very end of his life. Soon after, President Lyndon Johnson came to the Capitol and, as he said, with the outrage of Selma still fresh, called on Congress to take action to guarantee the right to vote. Months later, with the help of former Minnesota Senator and Vice President Hubert Humphrey, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law. I was fortunate, like every single senator up here, at points in my life to visit that bridge. And one in particular stands out for me. It was actually the 48th anniversary. That weekend, after 48 years, the white police chief of Montgomery handed his badge to Congressman Lewis and apologized for not protecting him and the freedom marchers. 48 years is a long time for an apology. And it only happened because Congressman Lewis never quit fighting for progress, for civil rights, for economic justice. But now, over 5 decades since that day in Selma, and since the Voting Rights Act became the law of the land, so much of the progress that Americans have fought for, that are documented in this museum, Americans have died for is at stake. It is no coincidence that this assault on the freedom to vote is happening just after the 2020 election, when nearly 160 million Americans cast a ballot more than ever before in the middle of a pandemic, in an election that the Trump Department of Homeland Security declared the most secure in history. This year alone, as I noted, hundreds and hundreds of bills have been introduced. That is why we are here. We are here in one of the states today where legislation was signed into law by Georgia's governor in March. The new Georgia law not only limits the number and availability of ballot drop boxes and puts limits on the hours of early voting, it also strips power away from local election officials and ultimately puts it in the hands of the state legislature, something that Reverend Senator Warnock has introduced a bill to change. This new law also reduces the time for runoff elections from 9 weeks to 28 days. And since Georgia law requires voters to be registered for at least 29 days before the election day, this means that previously unregistered voters won't be able to make their voices heard in the runoffs. Do you think it's a coincidence that it's 28 days for the runoff and then 29 days when you register? It's not one bit of coincidence. It is a blatant exercise of raw power. It also limits early voting for runoffs to 1 week, Monday through Friday, so you can't vote on weekends, allows a single person to challenge the registration of an unlimited number of voters, and makes it a crime for volunteers to give food and water on a nonpartisan basis to people in line. With similar bills now being considered in state legislatures across America, or signed into law already, this is a coordinated effort to limit Americans' freedom to vote. Our Constitution, in Article 1, Section 4, has equipped us to do exactly what we should do. That provision makes clear that Congress has the power to make or alter laws governing federal elections at any time. It is as clear as day. We must meet this moment. As President Biden said in Philadelphia last week, this is the test of our time. That is why we are here to hear firsthand about the attack on voting rights in Georgia, why we must pass the For the People Act, which we're all co-sponsors, of which Senator Merkley is the chief sponsor. This would create those basic federal voting rights that are allowed for by our Constitution, that were clearly anticipated in our Constitution, as well as cut down on the dark money in our politics and do something about ethics reform. With that, it is my honor to introduce our first witness and your senator, Reverend Raphael Warnock of Georgia.
Well, thank you so very much. And I want to say welcome to all of my colleagues to the great state of Georgia. We are very glad to have you and to welcome you to our state. Thanks so much, Chair Klobuchar, for inviting me to speak today about the urgent need for federal voting rights legislation. I'm especially grateful that the members of the Rules Committee have come here to the state of Georgia for its first field hearing in 2 decades. And we'll hear from Georgia advocates, many of whom I've worked with and alongside across the years, like Helen Butler, who have long been on the ground in this fight. And they can speak extensively to the detrimental impacts of voter suppression in Georgia. Over the last year, Georgia has become ground zero for the sweeping voter suppression efforts we've seen gain momentum all across our country. We saw record-breaking voter turnout in our last elections. What we did in Georgia this last election in terms of turnout should have been celebrated by everyone, regardless of political party. But instead, it was attacked by craven politicians who are more committed to the maintenance of their own power than they are to the strengthening and maintaining of our democracy. Spurred by the big lie, these same actors are now busy rolling back voting rights in a way that we have not seen in size and scope since the Jim Crow era. In fact, Georgia became the first of now 19 states in just a few short months to pass laws that restrict voter turnout in the wake of the November 2020 election. My home state exemplifies the effectiveness of these suppression efforts, as well as the power and the opportunity of what federal voting rights legislation can accomplish. Your vote is your voice, and your voice is about your human dignity. To fight for voting rights is to fight for human rights. There's nothing more noble, more important for us to do in a moment like this. And sadly, what we're seeing in Georgia is an attempt to deny certain people the ability to have their voices heard in our democracy. As I've said time and time again, some people don't want some people to vote. So they're trying to deny access to the ballot, to set up hurdles that voters have to cross as if voting is a privilege and not a right. So this new law in Georgia, SB 202, would make voting harder for countless Georgians by creating these hurdles that voters have to jump through in order to request an absentee ballot, while also reducing the number of drop boxes where voters can return their ballots, by making it harder for community organizations to assist voters, whether from requesting a ballot to just handing out a bottle of water, by letting a single person make unlimited mass challenges to the ability of other Georgians to vote, clearing the way for baseless accusations. Imagine that, your neighbor being able to challenge countless numbers of other citizens and their right to vote. And then even if you clear all of those hurdles, even if you are registered to vote and you've got your ballot in the door, your ballot still might not be counted. Because this new law also allows partisan officials in the state legislature to control our state board of elections and take over local elections. And it allows them to engage in these takeovers even while the votes are still being cast. This is a recipe not only for voter suppression, but for chaos in our democracy. But if we pass federal voting rights protections, which the Congress has the ability and the constitutional right to do, we can reverse these restrictions. We can provide a baseline for voting, basic standards that apply no matter what state you live in. We can pass legislation that would create uniform national standards so that your right to vote cannot be challenged. We can protect the freedom of voters to decide how they want to vote, whether it's on election day, during early voting, or by mail. And we can strengthen election security by providing new funding for states to replace old voting machines and enhance training for election administrators. And so along with Chair Klobuchar, as well as our colleagues and Senators Merkley, Warner, and Georgia Senator John Ossoff, I've also introduced the Preventing Election Subversion Act. This legislation would address some of the specific challenges we're seeing in Georgia by stopping mass challenges against voters and preventing state takeovers of local election boards. I want to be clear. Congress must take action on voting rights, and we have no time to spare. There is nothing more important for us to do this Congress. Since January, nearly 400 bills that would restrict voting have been introduced in 48 states. They've passed in 19 states. And as we speak, the Texas legislature is trying to become the next state. We Americans live in a great house that democracy built. And right now, that house is on fire. What good is it to expand the foundation if the house is on fire. And so we have to have national standards that push against what we're seeing in Texas and Georgia and all across our country. And while our brave brothers and sisters in the Texas legislature have risked so much to stop this effort, I am disappointed that some members of the United States Senate could not even bring themselves to open up debate on this critical issue. That's what went down the other day in the Senate, not the bill, but the ability to have a debate on the maintenance of our democracy. I submit that voting is not just an issue alongside other issues. I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea, this notion that all of us have within us sacred worth and thus the right to help determine the direction of our country and our destiny within it. Voting rights provides the framework in which all of the other debates about issues impacting our lives takes place. Infrastructure, climate change, healthcare, you name it, all critical issues, but democracy is the framework. So Congress must act. Congress has a unique responsibility to protect voting rights for every eligible American. To put it plainly, we're only able to work on these issues because someone voted to send us to Washington, and woe on us. Shame on us if the people send us to Washington to stand up for us, for them, and we won't stand up for their voices in their own democracy. So I want to be clear, we're only in the beginning of this stretch. Our fight has only begun. And I'm going to keep working in earnest with my Senate colleagues to pass voting rights legislation, and to do it this Congress. As I conclude my remarks, I can't help but reflect on the fact that we are in the Center for Civil and Human Rights. And I think of Congressman John Lewis, whom I knew personally. He was my parishioner. I was the pastor, but he clearly was the mentor. And as I was preparing to preside over his funeral, I asked myself, what was he thinking about as he crossed that Edmund Pettus Bridge? I assure you, he wasn't thinking about winning a Presidential Medal of Freedom. He wanted to win voting rights for every citizen because he was a patriot in the best sense of the word. Sitting in this shrine to civil and human rights, I cannot help but reflect on the words of Dr. King, who said in 1957, "Give us the ballot, and we will place on the benches in the South judges who will do justice and love mercy. And we will send governors to lead us who have felt not only the tang of the human, but the glow of the divine." This is a sacred moment. This is an inflection point in our country. We are in a 911 emergency for our democracy. History is watching us, and the future is waiting to see if we will act.
Thank you, and thanks for being such a patriot. Thank you very much, Senator Warnock. We now have the honor to hearing from Representative Billy Mitchell, who's here to give testimony today before we begin with our witnesses. As I mentioned, he is the chair of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus and president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, a 740-member organization of African-American state legislators from across the country. He represents Georgia's 88th district, which includes parts of Stone Mountain, Tucker, and Lithonia. Thank you for being here, Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman Klobuchar, ranking, and in absentia, Ranking Member Blunt, and members of the committee. Because I sit here before you today as a member of the largest state legislative Black caucus in the nation, give some deference to our chair, Senator Tanya Anderson, because we were literally in the trenches of this issue, doing whatever we could to combat and in some cases prevent it from being worse law. Because in large measure, it is the voters that we represent that will be mostly negatively affected by these new laws. Because we value this committee's purpose here today and so appreciate your members, particularly your member and our Senator John Ossoff and your Senator Raphael Warnock, who gave remarks, I want to express my sincere appreciation for this opportunity to come before you. And if I may, Madam Chair, I can tell you firsthand that Senators Ossoff and Warnock are not only extraordinary public servants, but the kind of people that make you want to take leave from your job to speak all over the state on their behalf, to give and to do all you can to motivate voter participation. After the most successful election, and I defined its success not by our candidates winning these elections, but by the fact when you have as many people who voted in the 2020 election cycle with as few problems, with all the challenges being dismissed, you have to consider that to be successful. Evidence of a strong democracy. For those who are amending election laws in states where they can, you really don't have to wonder what their true intent is. Since we're here in Atlanta, the birth and nurturing place of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I'm reminded of what he said decades ago, as Reverend Warnock said, when asked about the voting rights that pertain to African Americans, but he certainly could have been talking about any American when he said, some people don't want some people to vote. When you have the highest levels of voter participation combined with the lowest levels of challenges, why would you want to change that? And it's worth noting that the laws we operated under during the last election cycle were put in place by the same majority party that is now trying to tear them down. I could not agree with President Biden more. We are facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War, of which I'm particularly sensitive about, as I represent Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is home to the largest memorial to the Confederacy in the world for now, but I digress. I heard a member of the U.S. Congress proclaim that their intent was to make certain that these state laws pass so that those states could firmly be in control of the upcoming reapportionment process, assure Republican control, and create more Republican state legislative and congressional districts. As president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, I hosted the Texas House Democratic Caucus for dinner in Washington last week. We compared legislative language as passed in Georgia and proposed in Texas. I suspected that the language would be similar, but discovered that it was mostly identical. Verifying these proposals sweeping the nation are being provided by such groups as the Heritage Foundation and others. There is much talk about not being able to give food or water to voters online, but the actual law is much more abhorrent than that. The actual law states, and I'm going to read it, nor shall any person give or offer to give or participate in giving of any money, gifts, anything of value, including but not limited to food and drink. Meaning, if a person goes to the polls with their spouse and merely offers them some chewing gum or a magazine to read while in line, that person would be subject to arrest, up to $1,000 fine, and up to a year in jail. We all know that the uneven way this will be enforced throughout the state, the equal protection issues, the vagueness of it, make this ripe for court challenge. I believe that dark money, unlimited campaign spending is wrong. And I hope that you will be able to do something about it, but we will compete. I further believe that voter suppression is unfair and it is wrong. Hope you do something about it. But our grandparents and great-grands endured far less, far worse, and we will use this to motivate our voters to get out. But what I am most concerned about, and hope you come up with a solution for, is cheating umpires that these laws are creating. They are replacing elected officials in states and counties who must concern themselves with the will of the voters with political appointees whose only concern is the will of the person who appointed them. County election boards throughout the state run our elections. They are changing the law such that not only are they no longer required to be nonpartisan, But if they don't like the outcome of an election, they can simply and immediately just take over the election board. These political appointees could overturn elections without fear of being held accountable by the voters. For that reason alone, these election laws should concern us all. My former colleague, Stacey Abrams, says it best. Our elections may be partisan, but the operation of our elections should be nonpartisan. Lastly, let me say that the House of Representatives was the final arbiter of this law in Georgia. It came from the Senate to the House, then to the governor's desk for signing within hours. Moving that fast is virtually unprecedented. As chair of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus, I was the last speaker to the bill before we voted. I was so impressed with Senator Warnock's maiden speech on the U.S. Senate floor that I texted him to let him know I was going to use some of his words in my closing on the House floor. Being who he is, he sent back a quick prayer as he wished me well. I'd like to close with some of those remarks he used. The designers of our government intended the voters to be able to pick their candidates, not the candidates to pick their voters, lest we have democracy in reverse. The four most important words in the democracy are, the people have spoken. So we must do what we can to let the people speak. Once again, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Representative. All right. I want to call our witnesses up. I'm going to introduce them and then swear them in. Our first witness on the panel today is, maybe we'll change these out while I introduce them, is Georgia State Senator Sally Harrell. Since 2019, Senator Harrell has represented Georgia's 40th Senate district, which includes DeKalb, Fulton, and Gwinnett counties. Senator Harrell serves on 5 committees, including the Senate Ethics Committee, which has jurisdiction over election and voting issues. Senator Harrell also has served 3 terms in Georgia's House of Representatives from 1999 to 2005. She received her bachelor's degree in social work from Georgia State University and received a master's degree from the University of Georgia. Our second witness is Helen Butler, who serves as the executive director of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda and is a former member of the Morgan County Board of Elections. Ms. Butler has worked for the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda since 2003 and served on the Morgan County Board of Elections from 2010 until just last month. Ms. Butler previously served as a member of the State of Georgia Help America Vote Act Advisory Committee, and in 2013, she was appointed to serve on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights as a member of the Georgia Advisory Committee. Ms. Butler recently received the AFL-CIO's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Defender of the Dream Award, and in 2002, she received the National Associations of Secretary of State Award for Voter Education. Ms. Butler earned her Bachelor of Business Administration and Master's of Public Administration degrees from the University of Georgia, and she was one of the first 50 African American students to attend the University of Georgia after the integration of the school in 1961. Finally, our third witness is Mr. Jose Antonio Segura, a resident of Houston County and a Georgia voter since he moved to Georgia in 1992 as an Air Force officer and registered to vote in the state that same year. Mr. Segura has served in the Air Force for 35 years and is an engineer at Roberts Air Force Base. He served for 6 years as a military officer, including serving during Operation Desert Storm. Mr. Segura has voted in every general election in Georgia since moving to the state, including the November 2020 presidential election and January 2021 Senate runoff elections. During both of those elections, he voted early and in person. He waited for over 3 hours in line during the November presidential election and also waited during the January runoff election. He was determined to vote. He lives in Warner Robins, Georgia, with his wife of 33 years and has 3 children and 1 grandchild. And now we will swear in the witnesses. Stand up. Thank you. Do you swear that the testimony you give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you very much. All right, so why don't we start with you, Ms. Harrell. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Members of the Senate Rules and Administration Committee, thank you so much for coming to Georgia today to hear our story. We desperately need your help. I am Senator Sally Harrell, and I currently I'm serving my 5th term in the Georgia General Assembly, representing the northern suburbs of the Atlanta area. In my capacity as a minority member of the Senate Ethics Committee, I have deliberated several large and impactful pieces of legislation in Georgia, including House Bill 316, which paved the way for a statewide procurement of new computerized voting machines with printed ballots, paper ballots, and more recently, Senate Bill 202, the bill that just became law in Georgia. Though Senate Bill 202 bears the title Senate Bill, you might be surprised to know that this bill was never vetted by the Senate Ethics Committee. When Senate Ethics passed Senate Bill 202, it was a 2-page bill addressing absentee ballot applications. The House replaced this bill with a new 98-page voting bill. And the only vote that the Senate had on this new bill was to agree or to disagree with the changes made by the House. There was virtually no chance to debate this bill in the Senate committee or on the Senate floor. The Senate Ethics Committee did, however, consider dozens of election bills during the 2021 session. Some of these bills would have resulted in obstacles to voting much more severe than what finally passed in Senate Bill 202. For example, the majority party proposed ending Georgia's Department of Motor Vehicles automatic voter registration. They attempted to eliminate Sunday early voting, and thus the popular program Souls to the Polls events that are found in our Black communities. They also tried to eliminate no excuse absentee voting, which they themselves had enacted when they gained power in 2005. All these discussions were held in committee rooms eerily void of the public. This was due to the pandemic, but it was also due to constant last-minute meeting notices, as well as committee hearings scheduled before dawn and after dusk. Election bills were rushed through and voted on along party lines. The Georgia Secretary of State, who oversees our elections, was never asked to address the committee. Minority Party committee members often saw bills for the first time minutes before they were voted on. Questions addressed to bill authors by minority members were frequently answered dishonestly and disrespectfully. It was very apparent to me that there is no required oath to tell the truth in the Georgia General Assembly. I remember asking a legislator, the one who wanted to end automatic voter registration, if he could explain his claim that this bill increased voter confidence. He simply said, "It does." So I changed the wording of my question a bit and asked him again, same answer, "It does." In the 9 years I have served in the Georgia General Assembly, I have never seen such blatant disregard for the legislative process as I did with Senate Bill 202, and I see my colleagues nodding their heads with me. Georgia's legislative process needs reform, much more so than our voting laws do. It is the voters who will suffer. One of my constituents worked the polls at a library in my district, which prior to the election had been an early voting location. She told me the story of a young man who came to the library on his lunch hour thinking he could vote because he had voted at the library in the past. However, since it was election day, he was supposed to vote in his home precinct, which was way across town. Because he couldn't take more
years later, we are still fighting those same voter suppression laws that our founder, Dr. Lowry, along with Congressman Lewis, Dr. King, and so many others fought against in 1965. Today, we're faced with new laws passed by the majority Republican Georgia General Assembly in the wake of efforts by the former president and his allies to undermine the confidence in Georgia's elections with false and misleading claims of massive voter fraud. The majority party of the General Assembly wasted no time using that disinformation campaign as the foundation for passing numerous new restrictions on the right to vote in Georgia. My written testimony that I submitted to you outlined numerous burdensome and arbitrary requirements and other changes that directly attack voting methods being used by Black voters and other voters of color in Georgia in greater numbers. These changes also impact nonprofit civic engagement organizations like ours, which devotes substantial time and resources to register, educate, and mobilize communities of color and assist voters from before and on election day through our election protection program. But I want to talk about today my service as a member of the Morgan County Board of Elections. I served there from 2010 until my termination as a board member on July 1st, 2021, following the passage of a separate law placing the power to appoint board members in the hands of a majority white and Republican Board of County Commissioners instead of its long-standing bipartisan appointment process. During my time on the Morgan County Boards of Election, I took my position as a board member very seriously and worked to ensure the administration of elections in Morgan County was done fairly for all voters, regardless of partisan preference, race, or ethnic origin. We certified elections, determined which polling locations should be open. We counted the absentee ballots. We decided whose provisional ballots counted. We never had a violation during my time that I served on this board. The reconstitution of county boards of elections to ensure majority party control and the takeover provisions under SB 202, allowing for the majority party in the legislature to dictate policy by the state election board, to take over the day-to-day administration of county boards of elections, and remove county supervisors of elections, raises the specter that the goal will be to nullify the lawful votes of Georgia voters when the majority party is not satisfied with the outcome of an election, thereby achieving a result that the former president was unable to obtain in 2020. In short, the numerous changes in SB 202 attacking voting methods increasingly used by Black voters and other voters of color, taken in conjunction with the undemocratic takeover of boards of election, may lead to the partisan nullification of lawful votes, clearly demonstrate why federal standards must be enacted to restore the full protection of the Voting Rights Act, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, S1 for the People Act, and SB S2155, Preventing Election Subversion Act of 2021. It is critical. It was not just in my county of Morgan County that they have taken over control. They are now looking at other locations to take over. We've worked too hard to ensure equal and fair access to the ballot to turn back now. I'll be happy to answer your questions, and thank you for your time.